It began with a screenshot I wasn't supposed to see and a party invitation I wasn't supposed to accept. Under the warm glow of a charity gala, cameras flashing and champagne hissing in crystal, I arrived with the one person who could shatter my marriage with a look, the wife of the man my wife had been secretly seeing. I told myself it was about answers. I told myself it was about dignity. But beneath those noble words a colder truth waited, the kind that turns the room quiet even as the music thunders. I wanted the night to confess what everyone had chosen to keep quiet. What happened next did. If you map my life before that night, it looks tidy, predictable even. I grew up in a town where the mill closed before I learned the word recession, where kids tracked red clay into classrooms and teachers said the future was a test you could study for. I met my wife during a volunteer cleanup after a flood. She laughed with her whole face and knew the difference between apology and accountability. We built a small life with big rituals, Sunday pancakes, end-of-week movie nights, quiet hand squeezes before doctor's visits and job interviews. When the world felt loud, we curated our own hush. But tidy stories ignore pressure. The first hairline fracture was money. A promotion I should have gotten drifted to someone better connected, someone with a pedigree that came with embossed stationery. I took on extra hours without extra pay. My wife, Laura, started consulting on the side. New clients. New hours. New passwords. I still believed in us because believing is an easier habit than asking hard questions. The second fracture came with an old friend of hers, a polished community organizer named Aaron. He had the kind of charisma that made rooms lean toward him. He also had a wife, Maya, who led a neighborhood coalition against discriminatory lending practices that had redlined families like mine for generations. We met at events where people talked about justice like it was a destination, not a daily grind. I admired them. I also noticed the subtle choreography, who looked at whom for approval, whose hand hovered a beat too long, who finished whose sentence like a secret handshake. Suspicion isn't a single moment, it's a drip. Late-night texts. A cancelled road trip because Laura had to help with a campaign strategy. My name disappearing from her stories about her day. I told myself that working for social change demanded intensity. I told myself the cause was bigger than my ego. But the drip kept building a river. The screenshot arrived on a Tuesday, from a number I didn't recognize, accompanied by nothing but silence. A hotel hallway, two figures close enough to be one shadow, the timestamp stacked against the night she'd spent writing a grant. Denial buckled, and something colder calcified where trust had lived. I stared until the pixels turned to shrapnel. I didn't confront her. Confrontation asks for a conversation, and I wasn't ready to hear the explanations people rehearse when they know the moral physics. Who felt unseen, who carried invisible labor, who deserved one uncomplicated hour. I needed a different kind of proof, one that didn't beg for belief. That proof came in the form of a gala invitation arriving in my inbox, addressed to my name as if dignity could be CC'd. The event was a benefit for the neighborhood coalition, honoring Maya for her work exposing a local bank's predatory equity accelerator that accelerated inequality. I asked Maya to attend with me. It wasn't a trap. It was alignment. She deserved to be in the room that night because the work was hers, not the glow attached to her husband's charm. And I deserved not to stand alone. When she replied, brief, careful, and surprising, I realized we were stepping onto a stage neither of us had designed. The room would be full of philanthropists who collected virtue-like stamps, reporters ready to trade truth for a tidy quote, and the two people who believed their secret was tucked safely in shadows. I ironed my shirt, practiced a neutral face in the mirror, and drove into a night that felt like the last chapter of a book written without me. The gala unfolded inside a repurposed train depot, brick bones, steel ribs, a chandelier that looked like a frozen thunderstorm. Maya arrived 10 minutes early, punctuality wrapped like armor. She wore a simple black dress that refused to compete with the room's chandeliers, hair pinned like a statement about focus. If grief has a posture, she wore it straight-backed. If betrayal has a temperature, she had cooled it into clarity. We exchanged a brief nod that said we understood the risk of being seen together, and we would accept its consequences. Eyes turned. Some were curious, some were calculating. A photographer lifted a camera, then hesitated, as if reading a caption that might cause trouble. I could feel names being formed on tongues, respelled into rumor. Injustice wears different masks, and one of them is class. Who gets the benefit of doubt, who gets the benefit of discretion? I had none of those benefits on most days. But I had purpose now, and purpose steadied hands. Across the room, Lara and Aaron stood near the donor wall. They had the look of people who believe their reflections are allies. Their posture matched, relaxed confidence, insider ease. Lara scanned the crowd the way she had once scanned me for worry after a long day. Now her gaze glided past as if searching for better light. When she finally noticed me, her expression shifted through small weather, bright surprise, quick calculation, a cloud she tried to disperse with a public smile. Aaron glanced from me to Maya and did the math. The air around him chilled a degree. We circulated. Maya and I thanked elders who had organized before the hashtags, nodded with respect to mothers who turned grief into policy change. She introduced me to tenants who had won a lawsuit against slum conditions, people who knew the map of the city's inequalities the way others knew cocktail menus. The more I listened, the more I understood why people can be forgiven for mistaking proximity to justice for participation in it. Proximity had flattered Aaron. Participation belonged to Maya. A short film played, grayscale, slow-motion resilience, violins turning struggle into something palatable. The narrator explained how historical covenants had locked whole neighborhoods out of loans, and how a present-day bank had repackaged discrimination with polished language. Maya's research showed up in charts and footnotes. Aaron appeared as a talking head, charisma distilled, splicing words like inclusion and cross-racial solidarity in a way that made the audience clap between sips. And then the moment arrived, the honoree procession. The MC called names like incantations. When Maya's name echoed through the hall, applause rose, generous and deserved. I stood taller as she walked to the stage. From the corner of my eye, I saw Lara try to catch my attention, maybe to summon me to a corridor where the secret could be renegotiated. I stayed where I was, letting noise be my alibi. On stage, Maya thanked people who had taught her to read contracts the way others read scripture. She spoke of her grandmother denied a mortgage with a smile and a shrug, and how that shrugged smile still haunted the family album. She did not mention Aaron. She didn't have to. The omission had weight. As she returned to our table, a donor with a historical surname leaned in to ask a question that wasn't a question, the kind that tests whether the injured will keep the peace. Maya answered with the kind of grace that makes the truth impossible to ignore. When the donor drifted away, the lights dimmed, and the dance floor opened, rope lights outlining a space where reputations loosened their ties. We stepped forward together. The band found a tempo that fooled people into thinking they were graceful. The dance floor filled with practiced laughter. Lara approached with the careful speed of someone defusing a device. Aaron followed, hands in pockets, ready to perform the part of the unflappable advocate. I felt the weight of the room calibrating itself around 4 people orbiting the same center of gravity. If this were fiction, there would be a microphone and a speech. Justice, though, rarely arrives with a soundtrack. It arrives as a series of choices in ordinary time. Lara stopped an arm's length away and arranged her face into concern. Aaron adopted the posture of a man who expected to be forgiven because he believed himself necessary. Maya stood beside me like a compass. I looked at the couples spinning across the floor, the tiny negotiations and accommodations of togetherness, and I thought about all the invisible labor that keeps a life upright. My own fatigue had made me inattentive. Her need for admiration had made her reckless. His thirst for proximity to struggle had made him careless with the people closest to him. The words didn't need to be said aloud. The choreography was confession. A waiter passed with a tray of flutes. I took one, not to drink but to occupy a hand that wanted to point. The band slid into a stanza that sounded like possibility. The MC, sensing some gravitational shift, turned the lights brighter near the dance floor. cameras itched their straps. I set the untouched glass on the edge of a high-top table as if setting down something I had been carrying for too long. I stepped onto the dance floor with Maya. It was a small act, almost nothing. And yet in a room tuned to power, it was everything. We moved, not with the intimacy of romance, not with the awkwardness of strangers, but with the solidarity of two people refusing to be erased. Around us, the party reconfigured. Several women from tenant unions formed a circle, clapping in time, a perimeter of witness. A few donors hesitated, deciding which narrative would look best in morning light. Laura watched, her smile fixed but thinning at the edges. Aaron craned as if searching for a teleprompter only he could see. In that circle, the silence that had protected the affair collapsed. No accusation, no spectacle, just the truth standing where it could be seen. The band's melody swelled and then rested on a chord that felt like a door closing gently. When the song ended, applause followed, ambiguous, polite, but louder than before. Not for us, specifically. For the moment, honesty chose to sit at the table with the guests. Laura turned away, not to leave but to regroup, and in that pivot I saw the ledger of our years, the deposits and withdrawals, the quiet interest of time. Aaron cleared his throat in a way that begged for a stage he no longer owned. Maya exhaled, and the exhale felt like a verdict, not guilty of abandoning herself. The gala's program resumed, but something fundamental had shifted. Whatever story the four of us would tell afterward, the room had witnessed a different one, and it would travel. The party ended the way parties do, centerpieces half-tilted, napkins folded into little boats of indecision, the staff moving like a tide to reset the world. Outside, the depot steps held the night like a secret. Maya and I lingered there, not as co-conspirators but as co-witnesses, the air cool enough to make honesty visible. I drove her home. The ride was mostly silent, the good silence, the kind that comes after a storm reorganizes the branches but leaves the roots intact. Streetlights moved across the dashboard in slow geometry. We passed neighborhoods built on promises unequal in their delivery and storefront churches that stayed open on weeknights because sorrow doesn't keep a calendar. When we reached her block, I stopped beneath a tree that had outlived 3 mayors. She thanked me for the ride, not for the dance, not for the performance. Gratitude too easily becomes a currency people spend on the wrong things. Before she got out, she said something so simple it felt like a key in a lock. She said that truth, when spoken quietly, travels faster than rumor. At home, the house had an unfamiliar echo. 2 mugs sat in the sink like a pair who forgot the choreography. A lamp lit the corner where we used to read on Sunday afternoons. Laura was in the kitchen, hands around a glass of water she wasn't drinking. The refrigerator hummed like a witness reluctant to testify. She began to speak, and I let her finish because interruption was our old language. She talked about feeling isolated, about wanting to matter in a way that didn't depend on applause, about how change work can trick you into thinking the cause absolves the personal. She mentioned the tired list of pressures, schedules, deadlines, the nameless vacancy that opens when partnership becomes logistics. She didn't ask for forgiveness exactly, she asked for a map out of the mess. I told her the map didn't start with us. It started with accountability beyond apology. The kind that requires stepping back from rooms that reward you for nothing more than showing up with the right vocabulary. It started with acknowledging that the work she admired in others, especially women like Maya who do the research and absorb the blowback, had been made into a backdrop for a private drama. Racial injustice threads through personal decisions in ways people ignore until the bill arrives. Who is expected to keep the coalition's calendar and the household calendar? Who ends up offering quotes to the press while the spreadsheets get fixed late at night? Who pays for other people's ambition with sleep and years? There was no yelling, no dramatic exit. We divided the next weeks like people split a garden they're no longer tending together. She stayed with a friend. I kept the houseplants alive because living things deserve consistency, even if people falter. We began therapy on separate days with someone who treated grief like something to metabolize, not wallow in. And I made a decision that felt both small and seismic. I volunteered to help Maya's coalition with logistics. Nothing public, nothing that could be mistaken for grandstanding. I had spreadsheets and patience. Both had value. News of the dance traveled without our help. Not headlines, not scandal, just a message threaded through group chats and church lobbies. That a woman honored for her work stood in her own center while the man who borrowed her shine learned what it meant to stand off stage. In politics, the story often ends with the apology tour. But the communities that taught me how to notice injustice prefer a different ending, the part where the person who caused harm relinquishes the microphone and doesn't rush to replace it with a megaphone of contrition. Weeks later, a community forum opened the floor to tenants whose leases read like trapdoors. I handed out index cards, refilled water pitchers, and stacked chairs when backs ached. Maya spoke near the end, not as a martyr or celebrity but as a neighbor. She laid out steps the bank could take, transparent criteria, bilingual counselors, caps on fees that had been weaponized as gates. She credited the research team by name, and thanked elders who remembered a time before euphemisms. Aaron sat in the second row, listening, a pencil moving in a notebook that looked borrowed. If change was possible, it would begin for him, as it does for most, with quiet listening and the unglamorous labor of repair. As for Laura and me, we practiced a different kind of conversation, one where the goal wasn't to be right but to be useful. Some days she reached for defensiveness and caught herself. Some days I reached for resentment and set it down like the untouched champagne flute. We did not romanticize our recovery. We also didn't rush to declare outcomes. Love can survive betrayal, but only when it grows new roots from cuttings, not when it pretends the tree was never damaged. One evening we walked past the depot. The chandelier's glow leaked through the high windows. Weddings were popular there now, irony as inevitable as confetti. We stood outside and watched a couple pose under the arch of lights. I thought about how many vows are really promises to try again when the old version of you fails. Not everyone gets to try again. The city has whole blocks that never got their second chance because of decisions made in boardrooms and backrooms where no one bothered to learn the names of the people most affected. That is betrayal too, the kind that takes longer to name because it feels structural, not personal, until you realize structures are built from 1,000 personal choices. I don't offer this story as a blueprint for revenge or a justification for humiliation. Nothing we did that night at the gala was meant to wound. It was meant to witness. Sometimes the most radical act is to be seen refusing to vanish. Sometimes the bravest is to make space for the person who did the work to stand in the light without sharing it with the one who tried to steal it. If you're listening to this and measuring your own life against it, I won't ask you to forgive faster or to expose louder. I will ask you to notice where proximity to virtue has excused laziness in yourself or in the people you admire. I will ask you to consider who in your story has been doing the invisible labor, who has been asked to swallow the cost of other people's shine. And if you're the one who's been erased, I hope you find a dance floor, literal or not, where your presence becomes non-negotiable. The night at the gala didn't fix our marriage, and it didn't dismantle a bank's harmful practices. It did something smaller and maybe more durable. It reset the story so the truth could stop whispering. It taught me that justice sometimes sounds like soft applause after a simple dance. It reminded me that betrayal doesn't have to be the last chapter. Sometimes it's the punctuation that forces you to breathe differently between sentences. So here is the question I leave with you, the one that turned down the volume on my anger and turned up the clarity on my choices. When the moment comes to stop pretending, about your relationships, your work, your place in the systems that shape us, will you choose the silence that keeps you comfortable, or the quiet truth that sets the room in motion?